So welcome, this is another GCSE Edexcel Business Studies video. This is for those people who are taking the GCSE exam in 2018, although it will be useful for people who are taking it afterwards because cash flow still remains on the specification. As always, I'll talk really quickly. If you're in my classes, make sure that after you've watched the video, if there's any questions, you come and see me. Use the video to create your own notes. That's what they're there for. Use other resources, Tutor to You, Be Business, GCSE Bite Size, and really, if you're anything that you're struggling with here, make sure you do some more research to make sure that you understand the content of this video. You'll see that this is very clearly, this video is sculpted towards what's outlined in the 20 specification for last teaching this year, 2018, but it also uses the mark scheme very clearly over the past few years. And so if there is anything that you don't understand, make sure that you do some work to really clarify that understanding, because if cash flow comes up, it could be examined for quite a few marks in the exam. Next, a lot of students always say, why can't I use the words profit, revenue when I'm talking about cash flow? You have to change your mindset. As soon as you see cash flow in the exam, do not use the words profit, loss, revenue, because you're probably going to start confusing two different accounting terms. If we have a quick look here at a profit and loss account, if we sell £400 to £600 worth of stock, but we sell it on credit, then the profit and loss account would say that we've got revenue of £600. However, the cost of that stock was £400, so therefore we'd make a profit of £200, even though we've sold it on credit and we haven't actually received that money yet. Whereas the cash flow forecast wouldn't count that money until it came physically in, until the cash flowed into the business. And therefore, the cash flow statement would say we've got a negative cash flow of £400 because the negative is expressed in the brackets there. This isn't an accounting course. You don't really need to understand that, other than to say that if you use the word profit when you meant cash flow, then actually you could potentially mean completely the wrong thing. As soon as you see the cash flow question, inflows, outflows, positive cash flow, negative cash flow, replace them for the U words that we usually use, profit, loss, revenue, etc. The spec, really clear. You need to know about how to establish more favourable credit terms, destocking, and you need to be able to understand the difference between your inflows and outflows and how to make changes in order to improve the business. So what do we need a good cash flow for? Good cash flow is about survival. A business will not last long without that cash. Money has to come into the business through cash inflows. This is normally sales, which is our main cash inflow, and then we have money going out. Our biggest cost for most organisations, the biggest cash outflow is normally salaries, and the difference between the two is your net cash flow. That's the simple equation that you need to know in order to be able to access Unit 1.3. Cash flow is either described as positive, where we've got more cash coming in than going out, or negative, where we've got less money coming in than we have going out, which is not a great position to be in, and if negative cash flow lasts too long, then you will cease to exist. Quick list of inflows and outflows. These have come from the mark schemes in previous years. This is a list that you just have to remember, and the reason that you have to remember it is it's a really easy 3 marks. It's really common for the examiners to ask a question, 3 inflows, 3 outflows of cash flow. It can also come up in the Unit 1.3 exam, so these lists, it's a case of sitting there, copying it out a few times, trying to commit to memory. I'm not going to labour the point. I'll just leave you to read it. There's a couple of things I would like to point out on it though. Loans and overdrafts. As we start to think more about cash flow, what you'll realise with these two, as opposed with loans and overdrafts, is that although they'll give you an inflow immediately, they also pop up over here, bank loan repayments, as an outflow. So loans and overdrafts will get money into the business initially, but have to be paid back over a longer term, and therefore increase outflows. So just be aware of that. Make sure that you are able to apply that knowledge if you get any longer answer questions. Big outflow, as I said, salaries, and then all the way down to the payments for raw materials. The only thing to bear in mind when it comes to the actual exam is if they're asking you in context for 3 outflows, rather than just say rent, if it's, say, an organisation like Primark, rent of the shops Primark uses, rather than saying raw materials, payment for fabric to make t-shirts. If there are a way that you can root it in context when providing that answer and not being totally generic, that would be something that would be worth doing. But this list, learn it. 2 key terms which we've not come across before, credit terms. So let's start there. It might be something you've heard before though. When people buy things on credit, just means that they're not paying for them straight away. Now in organisations, credit terms are huge because for most organisations, when they get their stock from their suppliers, they don't pay for that straight away. Suppliers want businesses to use them, and therefore their customers, other businesses, they will often give them normally 28 days to be able to pay for the stock that they've been given. Now, in order for a business to keep its own customers, it will often offer them payment terms, some credit terms as well. Now, the example I've provided there is if your supplier wants the money in 7 days, but your customers want 14 days to be able to pay you, then that means you've got a shortfall there of 7 days, where you've got money going out to your suppliers 7 days before you've got any money coming in from your customers. And that's assuming that everything sells all on the same day in the same way. So this can cause cash flow problems. So if there's a question about how can you improve or change credit terms to improve cash flow, changing credit terms would be encouraging your suppliers to give you longer to pay. This in effect gives you a loan. If you can get those suppliers to allow you another 14 days, 28 days in order to pay your bills, that's effectively a loan from them. And that helps reduce the outflows in the very short term, and that can potentially improve your cash flow. If at the same time as getting longer payment terms from your suppliers, you can also encourage your customers to pay you much more quickly, that will improve your cash flow straight away. Now, if you're struggling with that idea, draw yourself a little cash flow forecast and play about with the numbers. Think about what would happen if your sales, money coming in, moved a month from January to February. Play about with some of those numbers to really think about, well, how would it affect if we can get money in quicker from customers and we can delay money going out? That changes those inflows and outflows. Destocking. Destocking is reducing the amount of stock that a business holds. Now, there's a couple of ways that businesses can do this. If a business wants to change its cash flow, this doesn't improve inflows, but it reduces outflows dramatically because you're not replacing stock. So as money's coming in, because you're selling bits of stock, you're not spending money to replace that stock. Now, for a big business, maybe like Tesco's, they might destock entire lines. So sell off all the items, all the products they've got. Say they're going to stop selling, and they never would, Heinz baked beans. They might sell thousands of tins of Heinz baked beans, but not replace any of them. So everyone that they sell is inflows, money coming in, but there's no outflows because they're not replacing those beans. They're not choosing to keep that stock. In other aspects, it might be, 100 pairs of jeans, and you decide that instead of holding 100, you're going to hold 50. So for the next 50 pairs of jeans, that's just going to be an inflow, and there will be no outflow there because you're not going to replace them. You're just going to reduce the level of stock. Now, as anyone who's been looking at just in time and just in case is aware, reducing levels of stock could potentially cause problems if you don't have enough stock to meet unexpected customer demand. Now, we're at the real business end of the video now. The bits which are going to score big marks if they come up in the exam. How to improve cash flow and why cash flow is so important to an organisation. There's a list here. We've got 10 things on the list. Short, long term. They're a rough approximation. I think some of them might even be in the wrong category. Some might be more medium term and some could arguably be short term. I'm not going to get too bent out of shape on that. You need to do a little bit of research and make sure that you're comfortable with the terms on here. If we look at the short-term list, we've already looked at delayed payments. We've already looked at making your customers pay quicker. We've already looked at destock, so I'm not going to spend any time on that. But you need to be aware of how they improve cash flow. I'm going to look at leasing. So first of all, if you think about you're a business and you've got lots of cars, so for example, for us people who are living in Morley, we've got O2 who's very, very close to us. Now O2 could go out and buy lots of vehicles for its staff that need to drive around, or it could go out and lease those vehicles from an organisation. Now, hopefully you can see pretty quickly if they've got, say, 10 vehicles to buy, it's a minimum of maybe, say, £200,000, which would be an outflow tomorrow if they needed to buy those cars today. Or they could do a deal with an organisation where they would lease those cars, never own them, but they would pay maybe, let's say, £200 a month. So rather than there being a £200,000 outflow today, there is only a £2,000 outflow today because they're leasing the vehicles. Now, over time, you might have to pay more, but in the short term, you're going to have a really reduced outflow, which will create a more positive cash flow. Overdraft, again, short term, that will bring money into the organisation. Long term, interest payments could be quite high. And then finally, a factor. I ummed and ahed about whether to put this in. A factor is somebody who buys a debt off you. So if I'm a building firm, for example, and I'm owed £500,000 by a customer, I might go to my bank, who will usually act as the factor, and they buy the debt off me. Now, it's much more complicated than this, but let's just to keep it simple. I'm owed £500,000. I go to the bank and they say, okay, we'll buy it off you for £400,000, and they'll give me £400,000. So I get an immediate short-term cash inflow. However, the long-term negative impact of that is I won't get as much money as I was expecting. If we have a look at the longer-term ways to improve cash flow, you can sell assets. That's come up before. It's very, very popular. Great way of improving cash flow and never having to pay it back. But if you're selling it, will you get a great price for it? Because if you don't need it, why would other people potentially need it? If you're a PLC or an LTD, selling shares, great way of bringing money in, but could take quite some time to do it. And the top one, increasing sales. It's the most obvious way to improve inflows, but it's not something that will happen overnight. Improving sales probably cost you money initially. Better customer service, advertising. So it's probably going to cost initially to make that increase in sales work. But if you can increase sales, obviously it's a fantastic way to improve cash flow. What's the importance? Without cash, your business will not survive. If you cannot pay bills, you're gone. That's it. And we frequently see organisations all the time. This is the tipping point for them. The moment that they can't pay the rent, the moment that they can't pay staff, the moment that they can't pay suppliers, that's when the business shuts down, goes into liquidation, and it has to go. A positive cash flow will allow you to borrow money. So if you can organise your cash flow so that you've got a cash flow forecast which says over the next few months cash inflow will be higher than outflows, and you've got a positive cash flow, then it's likely that you can go and see a bank. They will give you even more money, which will improve that cash flow, allow you to grow the business and make increases in inflows over a longer period of time. Once you've got a consistently long cash flow forecast which is positive, more inflows and outflows month after month, then you'll be able to think about how you use that money and whether that money is going to be used to improve research and development, promotions, or other aspects of the marketing mix. Because without doing those things, going out and getting a bank loan improves cash flow in the short term. It will allow the organisation to have money for potentially a few months, but unless you generate sales, then in the long term a business is always going to be doomed. Getting a question started about the importance of cash flow. I've got a very simple PDDD and another P paragraph. So there's quite a lot there that you could turn the previous slide into an answer which looks or starts like this. I'm not going to say anything about it other than I'd say pause the tape, pause the YouTube video and read this slide. It's got a point, 3 developments, so more than you'd need, another point which could potentially be developed a little bit more. Have a read of it, try and commit some of this to memory. It would be a fantastic start to any question about the importance of cash flow, which then leads us into, no matter how good you are at managing cash flow, if you don't do these things, then your business will cease to exist in the long term. If you don't sort out a quality product, if your brand image is poor, if your location's poor, doesn't matter how good your cash flow management good is, your business will cease to exist.